for those joining us in Mountain and Pacific time zones, and good afternoon for those joining on Eastern and Central time zones. My name is Joseph Roybal Sanchez, AARP New Mexico State Director. We are thrilled that you have joined the third of a four-part webinar series focused on key disaster preparedness topics for older adults and their families. AARP New Mexico has partnered with AARP's Livable Communities Technical Assistance Program and the St. Bernard Project for the last 3 years. In 2023, we had an in-person disaster readiness symposium in Las Vegas, New Mexico, following New Mexico's largest wildfire in New Mexico's history, scorching over 341,000 acres. In 2024, we had an in-person Emergency Management Symposium in Albuquerque, New Mexico, as a build upon of our 2023 symposium. And now in 2025, we bring this four-part virtual training series on getting prepared for disasters as households and individuals. I want to go over some housekeeping items before I turn it over to our partners at the St. Bernard Project. The webinar session is being recorded. For those that have joined us, we would like to know who you all are and joining us today. So add your name and location, city, state, if you can, in the chat. We invite attendees to use the Q&A function throughout the session. At the end of today's seminar, we are asking that you complete a brief survey to be entered into a disaster supply kit raffle provided by AARP New Mexico. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Helen from the St. Bernard Project to kick off today's informative session. Helen.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and thank you for your continued partnership with SBP. For all those joining today, and especially if you have not been on one of the previous sessions, we want to start by highlighting that the AARP Disaster Resilience Toolkit is a really great guide and resource for anyone working with older adults. So whether you're an individual or if you're a local leader helping out in your community, please check it out for a lot of great tips and ideas of how to help in disaster preparedness. We also have a reminder that there's one more session in this four-part series after today, and that session will be next Wednesday on July 30th on making your recovery plan in advance. Our first session at the beginning of the series talked about a lot of key preparedness tips generally, and this ending session will now really talk about thinking through some of these key issue areas, like how do you integrate recovery planning into that larger preparedness plan, protecting important documents, and avoiding fraud issues post-disaster. So we hope you'll join us for the last session as well. And so with that, for those that haven't joined before, I'm going to give a little bit more background information. My name is Helen Wiley. I'm our Disaster Preparedness Program Director at SBP. And SBP is a national nonprofit whose mission is to reduce the time between disasters and recovery. We were originally founded 2 decades ago after Hurricane Katrina in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, as the St. Bernard Project. And while we restarted as a rebuild org, through the decades, our work has really expanded to be all across the disaster cycle. We do a lot of technical assistance and lesson sharing for other partners and communities on best practices and greater preparedness, long-term resilience efforts, and what will most help communities be better positioned going into the next disaster. Specifically, those of us on today and leading the series are in our disaster preparedness program, and we'd encourage you to check out our resource hub online at sbpusa.org/resource hub for a lot of preparedness guides, resources, videos, checklists, as well as all of our recovery resources and other upcoming trainings to keep engaging in important disaster preparedness topics. And so with that, here today, we're going to talk about one key disaster area that, when we think about different disaster events, we think of floods, wildfires, hurricanes for other parts of the country, tornadoes, but extreme heat is a major risk. And so we're going to focus on that today and some key tips for preparing for it. So particularly how to identify your risks, making your plan, and better protecting your home. As a reminder, please put any questions that come up throughout our short presentation today in the Q&A box. So I'm going to start with knowing your risks. As no surprise for all of you that are based in New Mexico, there are a lot of extreme heat risks in the state. And so you'll often see notifications on the news, if you listen to the local news or radio, or if you follow the National Weather Service on, that maybe there's more moderate risk, major heat risk, or maybe there's a large heat wave that's going on for an extended period. While New Mexico is not currently under a heat wave, a lot of the country is. And so it's been making headlines a lot, not only in New Mexico, but around the country this summer. And importantly, as we think about extreme heat, what the science shows us from the National Weather Service, NOAA, and other agencies and scientific organizations is that this year we're projected to continue having a lot of extreme heat across the country. You can see that certainly New Mexico is a region of the country that has a high probability of it more generally, but especially this year. And so it's really critical that we're keeping attuned to weather alerts to know when to shelter and be more cautious outdoors. So what is extreme heat? Well, time of the year, we're more typically going to see it between May and October each year. Importantly, if you have friends and family in other parts of the country, nowhere is untouched by extreme heat. We can have extreme heat events anywhere across the US. Unlike a lot of the other disasters, though, like floods and hurricanes, tornadoes, extreme heat is very slow moving. And so the extent and duration of an extreme heat wave can really compound issues for folks over time when they're getting no relief from the extreme heat weather. And how it works is, you're having high pressure weather systems forcing air downward. This gets trapped near the ground and then warms everything up for an extended period. Unsurprisingly, but really critically when we're thinking about extreme heat, particularly for more vulnerable populations like older adults and those with more health challenges broadly, is that extreme heat can have a lot of impacts on your health. It can lead to heat exhaustion, heat stroke, other heat-related illnesses, and it can also worsen pre-existing medical conditions that you might have. And so what most folks don't know is when we think about different disaster events, heat is actually the leading weather-related cause of death in the US. And so we really want to take seriously things we can do to better prepare for it. And so with that, we started with better knowing your risks. It's really important to make sure that you're attuning to local weather sources to know when it's really advised to not be outdoors at all or for an extended period. And so we really encourage folks to keep up with your local news stations, consider downloading any apps to your phone or see if a family member can help you. Signing up for local emergency alert through your city or county's emergency management page. And so, search on the internet for Albuquerque's emergency management department. And typically on one of their first pages, there'll be a notification about here's where you can make sure you get signed up for local emergency alerts. Knowing the terms, there's a difference between different levels, and this extends across different disaster event types, but let's think about extreme heat in particular. When you see an alert that says advisory, that means that there's dangerous heat predicted to occur, but it's not necessarily expected to reach extreme heat warning criteria. So you want to be cautious and keep up with the weather, but there's no immediate danger. Watch means that dangerous heat is very possible, and so you should be prepared. So this is where, when we talk about some later actions in this presentation, you want to start getting more prepared and doing those. And then when there's an extreme heat warning, that means that dangerous heat is already occurring or about to occur. So you should take action right now. And so I think really across all these categories here, you want to keep watching the news closely, and it's always better to be more cautious than less so in terms of taking care of your health and that of loved ones. So now we're going to go into briefly making your plan. When you think about disaster preparedness, there's so many great kit items that you might already have in your home that you can gather in one place and then fill in with a few additional items. And so some of these things extending across all disaster types include, for instance, having a first aid kit that's readily available for you, as well as your medications and medical items that you might need quickly, especially if you were to go to a loved one's home, if your home, for instance, doesn't have air conditioning. But I want to highlight here some of the items that are really critical when we're thinking about extreme heat prep. And so some of those, for instance, are if you, for instance, don't have central AC in your home, trying to invest in a window air conditioning unit that you can put in or have at the ready if there's an extended heat wave. So at least one room of your house is going to be safer to stay in during that extended heat period. Ensuring that you have things so if you need to go outside, like sunscreen, sunglasses, more lightweight clothing, a hat. So again, you're going to be protected and stay a little bit cooler for that period that you need to be out doing things. Across most disaster event types, really important to think about ways to keep communication going. Because one thing to think about with extreme heat is it might happen when there's another event occurring. So if there's a flood in your area, really severe storm, and the power goes out, and then on top of that, there's a heat wave, you're going to be more vulnerable for various reasons. And so really critical to make sure you can keep communication going if possible. So having a battery powered radio at the ready, making sure your cell phone has a charger or an external battery so you can get at least a few charges back in. And then having things like handheld or box fans to circulate more air in your home. Making an emergency plan is critical for all different disaster types, but you want to make sure in your household disaster plan that you're thinking about extreme heat as one route of impact for you. And so that means checking your emergency supplies annually. So if you already have a supply, adding some of the items that were just listed on the previous slide that could help you in particular during an extreme event, heat event. Making your plan. So this really, again, goes across all event types, but how are you going to stay connected with folks if there's any updated warnings? And then practicing it. So if you live alone, coordinating with your neighbors or other loved ones nearby on how you're going to stay coordinated. And going through the actions so it feels less overwhelming at the time of an event if it occurs. With extreme heat, if you do not have air conditioning in your home or are concerned about the loss of AC during an extended power outage, one thing you can do ahead of time is learn where your local cooling center is located. So this might be a community center that has a generator that is designated as a spot for folks to go if there's a power outage or disaster event. It could be a library, for instance, but look up, under cooling centers in your city, what's located. It might be a disaster resource center, it might be listed as a cooling center, but there's often going to be ones in your area. And so a little bit more specifically here, there's a few different ways to identify where your local cooling center might be located. So you can call your local 211 for assistance in identifying where that cooling center might be located. Or you can reach out to your local health department or emergency management agency for support. And then, as I said, it might be that local libraries or community centers are places to also consider if they have generators, even if they're not designated specifically as a cooling center. But also as your plan, you might, if you have friends or family nearby, want to make a plan on whose house you would go to if you have power outages or don't have AC for extreme weather events. So a few more things here, because we're talking about making your plan and staying safe, because we know, again, this is a high risk event for anyone, but especially older adults. Is a few key things to stay safe is, again, reinforcing, finding an air conditioned location. If temperatures go over 95 degrees Fahrenheit, you want to avoid using handheld fans as your cooling device, because what they're just doing is circulating the air, but they're not actually cooling you down. And so actually finding a place with AC or that is cooler is going to be better for you in regulating body temperature. Make sure you're continuing to drink plenty of water, staying hydrated, wearing lighter clothing. And then really, again, not everyone can do this, but trying to avoid going outdoors as much as possible. And if you need to go outside, finding more shaded areas, wearing sunscreen, and doing things like having a hat on so that you can stay a bit cooler. Take signs of heat-related illness very seriously. So if you're feeling lightheaded, a little bit off, it's always better to be cautious. Try to go indoors, sit down, drink water, and let someone know that you're not feeling well. We'd really advise folks to go to the Center for Disease Control's safety page for extreme heat. You can find that by scanning this QR code, and we'll also, in a follow-up email, send out a link to that page for everyone to access. We are not medical professionals at SBP, so we really do want to refer people to those critical resources like what the CDC has. But I will share a couple key things to be looking for in identifying, for instance, if you are having heat sickness during a heat wave. And so, learn how to identify and treat those illnesses. So again, if you're seeing things that you feel like you're getting dehydrated, you're having cramps, you want to take that very seriously. And it's always better to contact a medical professional if you have concerns about your health. And also, if you have any neighbors that you're worried about, make sure that you go and check in on them as well. So have that buddy system that you're there for one another as part of your plan, so that everyone is being accounted for and has more of that sense of community. So last section here, and again, a reminder to put any questions you have in the Q&A box. So getting your home ready. There's a few different things we can do to help mitigate how hot our homes get. And so really important things to do for those that are homeowners on this call is annual inspections and maintenance. That's always such a great preventative thing across different disaster types. But have that yearly checkup of your air conditioning ducts for proper insulation. So making sure everything's working well, and it's less likely that your AC is going to go out during really extreme weather. Having a professional or a family member who's well versed in this inspect, caulk and weather stripping, insulation. So again, making sure that the AC is better staying in the home so it's more energy efficient, but you're also being better cooled. And then again, thinking about now. So if you're not in an area that's super, super hot right now, taking additional actions if you're feeling like it does get really hot and you're struggling more during extreme heat events, take those actions now. So if you don't have central AC, work towards investing in a window air conditioning unit. There are sometimes local programs that can also help cover the costs through a grant of helping households get at least one of these. And so you can also look through your local fire department or emergency management to see if they have any programs to help folks. Cover all windows. So when it's really hot, close your window shades, put drapes on as much as possible. That'll help keep those rooms cooler, particularly when you're not using them for when you go back in. Try to do things like using window reflectors to reflect heat back outside can be really helpful. And you'll see here as well a link, which we'll share as well after in a follow-up email. But the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program is across the US and has as well different grants and resources to help homeowners with cooling costs. And so we encourage you to check out their page for more information on some of their programs. We've talked a bit about this with power outages, but when we think about protecting our home, there are things we can do ahead of time to stay safer. And so one of those things that we want to do during any type of power outage event is making sure we're regularly testing our fire alarms and carbon monoxide detectors. So what I like doing is adding to, whether it's a physical calendar or a phone calendar, having like early in January each year, that time that I'm reminding myself to go and check them. And so having at least that one time. If you yourself are not able to get up high in your home to check things, again, plan for when a family member's in town, neighbors visiting, or you're having a handyman by to ask them to help you test your fire alarm and carbon monoxide detectors. If you have a generator, which is something we really encourage everyone to invest in, there are smaller generator devices, there are larger ones, there are solar powered ones, there are ones that are gas generators. But you want to make sure, no matter what your type of generator is that you might have, if you have one, is that you're following the safety protocol. And so ensure that you keep the instructions from the generator device, look up online or whatever source you use for any additional information, but making sure that you're being as cautious as possible to prevent any safety issues while using a generator. And as I said earlier, I think something that's important to remember here is extreme heat events can, as I shared, be very deadly, but especially so if they happen at the same time as another disaster event. And so thinking again about flooding, that there's flood risks year-round in New Mexico. There's also wildfire risks depending on where you're located. And so you need to be prepared that unfortunately there could be an instance where you experience one of those other disasters and then have extreme heat on top of it. And so it's always better to be more prepared than less prepared. So make sure you've got really good water supplies at home, you've made your plan, and you're going to then be better positioned for whatever event comes your way. And so with that, again, this is just a quick webinar today, but want to go over, we talked about knowing your risks, staying informed, making your plan, which really includes all of these actions, learning extreme heat safety, and better preparing your home specifically for extreme heat so that you'll mitigate some of that risk for your own health. And so with that, I'm going to share a few resources and then we will get into the Q&A here. So first off, New Mexico's Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management at the state level has many fantastic resources and programs to help you and other community leaders with disaster challenges. And so if you're looking for more information on different programs in New Mexico, we'd highly recommend you look up some of this information listed here on this slide. We'll also be including the slide deck following this presentation for folks if you want to look back on specific slides like this. Additionally, that same state office has a preparedness page specifically for residents. And so that's a great page to check out for more tips on extreme heat as well as other disaster event types. We also encourage you again to go to SBP's resource hub for our own information on household preparedness and recovery actions for folks. On extreme heat specifically, we'll follow up with these, but we this year were able to create a new front and back extreme heat flyer. And so if you're looking for some reminders today about what we covered, we encourage you to look at that flyer as a key resource on getting started on more of the things we covered today. And it includes a short supply checklist of those items that are specifically recommended for extreme heat. It's available in both English and Spanish if you have loved ones that speak Spanish as well. And then another format, again, keeping yourself going, or if you want to send things to loved ones who weren't able to attend this webinar today. We also have a new 2-minute video on 5 key actions to get prepared. And so we'll link that as well for everyone. And so then finally, we really want to understand what information is helpful to all of you that attended this webinar today. And so in partnership with AARP New Mexico, all folks that respond to this very short survey, it should take a minute or 2 max, will be entered into a disaster preparedness kit raffle that AARP New Mexico is leading. And so you can scan the QR code here on the screen to access that on your phone. We'll also be following up with the link to it over email following today's presentation. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leanne for any questions folks have about today's content or anything else you're thinking about in disaster preparedness.
Thank you, Helen, for such a great presentation to getting us thinking about how to get prepared in the face of heat. We actually have a couple of questions that came through, and folks, if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. The first one is, what is a good starting point for building personal preparedness for extreme heat events?
I think as we shared, like a good starting point is downloading a weather app or deciding on where you're going to get your extreme heat information. So, checking if you're signed up for if you're signed up for any type of emergency alert will really help you because they'll typically be sent out if there's something like an extreme heat wave where you need to be really careful. So that's always my starting point. I'd say if you're looking for other types of actions, making your plan. So starting to talk with whoever you would rely on so that you're not alone in getting prepared or dealing with a disaster if it occurs. And so if that's a family member, if that's a neighbor, whoever would be the person you turn to be part of your support system and communication system during a disaster event, it's important to identify that person or those people and then start into a deeper conversation on what other actions you need to take to feel more comfortable and prepared.
Thank you, Helen. And then we have another question. What's one action you'd recommend everyone to take this week to improve their household disaster readiness?
That's a really good one. An action I would recommend is think through a few key items that you can keep in your car, because you never know when you're going to be out and about or your car breaks down. And you might need some additional supplies in your car. And so we actually recommended SVP having a secondary kit of sorts in your car. So that might be items like a flashlight, extra water supply, some snacks, some hygienic wipes, things like that. And so you can take about 5 to 10 minutes max to gather a few items that you think might be helpful to keep in your car in the event of a number of different types of disasters or emergency scenarios. And that's a great way, again, to get started. Preparedness doesn't need to be overwhelming. You can take small actions like that and you'll feel more at ease.
Thank you, Helen, and definitely agree. Taking those small steps does make a difference. Okay, well, those were all our questions for today. I'm going to pass it back over to Joseph for closing statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Helen. And thank you all for joining us for today's third session in a 4-part disaster preparedness series. Once again, just a friendly reminder before we close, please take a moment to complete the short survey you'll receive. Doing so will enter you into that raffle so you could earn that disaster supply kit that Helen just talked about, right? It's kind of nice to have a little supply kit in your car or somewhere that's easily accessible. So looking forward, our next and last series of webinar of this 4-part series is next Wednesday, 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And we'll be talking about making your recovery plan in advance. We look forward to seeing you at the upcoming session next week. Stay safe and stay prepared. Thank you.